Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our 3 o'clock session with our Women's Choral Director, Dr. Gregory Fuller from the University of Southern Mississippi. And we're excited to have him here. And what we would like for you to do, there will be a poll that we'll see in just a few minutes. It'll pop up, and we'd like you to take the poll to determine whether or not you are teaching high school or church, or if you do both. And so without any further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Gregory Fuller.
Good afternoon. Beautiful day here. I hope it is for you as well. As he said, I'm Gregory Fuller. I'm at the University of Southern Mississippi. I'm actually in my 21st year, and I certainly have been around this area and have spent a lot of time at events in Louisiana, and I'm sure I've met many of you. Excited about working with the All-State in the near future, and excited to be here today. I started with some questions that is on a file that is going to be shared with you, and I'll ask Greg if he can put that up. And Greg, let me know if they're seeing that file.
I will, hopefully Elisa will turn that file on. There it is.
Okay. And I just want to go through, to start today, a set of 5 questions. There could be many questions. But how many of you could utilize more budget money and resources each year? And I have a feeling I know the answer to that question for most of you. How many of you lack?
All right, we lost Dr. Fuller for a second. We'll give him a chance to reconnect, and everybody can take their time, this opportunity to go in and do the poll. Right now, the winner seems to be high school.
Hello? Do you want to try and give him a call?
I think what I'm going to step away. I just sent him a text, so everybody hold on. I'll try to give him a call.
Sure. And tell him just to refresh.
Am I back?
You are back.
Where was I?
Who knows? Looks like we got quarantined.
You went to Narnia and back.
That's right.
Well, it didn't feel very exotic. So anyway, Well, I'm sorry for those who are here. I was going through a list of questions and I won't read them to you again, but did they hear me say the questions?
We heard one question about could you use more budget money? And that was
Well,
when apparently our administration heard something about that and just cut you out of the
cut
mix.
me out completely. Well, I asked these 5 questions because they're relevant to my life and how I got to doing a lot of collaboration. And the first question, could you use more money, resources? The second one, do you lack critical mass or instrumentalists to credibly perform major works? And for a lot of us, that's important. Um, and then how many of you would like to offer more experiences for your students, whether they be travel, joint concerts, different venues, guest performers? How many of you would see the benefits of teaching your students the value of service? And how many might still have career moves ahead of you where artistic success will be critical to you having a successful application for other jobs? And these questions come to mind for me because I can tell you that when I was about 30 years old, I got my first collegiate teaching job in Iowa. And it was at a Franciscan Catholic college. And I certainly did not have the resources I needed. Um, I did not have really the ability to do major works with orchestra. Um, and my students needed those experiences. I wanted them to be able to travel. I think that one of the things that's important about what we do as educators in general is to make the world bigger for our students. And that can happen through travel, that can happen through doing new music, it can happen through having guests. And also, the fourth question is a little bit odd, but I think you'll see how it's relevant later on. Do you would you like to see your students find out what the benefits are of service? My little college used to require a service component to graduate, and we kind of laughed because if you require service, is it in fact service? But I began to see the value because a lot of those students had no idea about what being a volunteer at any type of event, a soup kitchen, Meals on Wheels, working at a homeless shelter, all kinds of things. So service can be something you can teach your students. And how many of you still have career moves ahead of you where being successful is going to be important so that you can show artistic success to your future employer? I needed all of those things when I was young. And so, to be honest with you, collaboration became my ticket to getting most of those things done. And had I not reached out to other people and other entities, I probably would have failed at achieving better outcomes for all 5 of those questions. And what I'm going to talk about today, some of it's going to be incredibly obvious. And some of you will think, well, I've thought of that, I've done that. And so this is, in some ways, will be in reinforcement. But I hope then there's a few things that I talk about today that are bigger and maybe a little further down the road than you've thought. So if Greg can scroll me on down to the next page. So right there. I put some things here quickly. You know, collaboration has helped my singers connect to a larger community of singers. It's often wonderful to know that there's people out there doing the same things we're doing. In some cases, that's successes, but some cases, that's the same set of challenges. Um, Creating critical mass in our business is exciting. Many of you have sung in large groups. Sometimes it's the honor choir setting, sometimes it's the mass choir setting at a festival. But critical mass can be exciting for students, particularly when they haven't experienced it. Sharing experiences is important for building relationships. And whether it's relationships with people that you have at your school, in your district, in your state, but even further afield, sharing experiences is the way you build relationship and then lasting friendships. I always tell my graduate students that the most important thing about studying in graduate school is building relationship with your colleagues, because they will be your lifetime friends. Um, Bringing audiences together, to me, has been a wonderful thing. I might, in a collaborative situation, have a different group of people with us. They bring a different audience to our programming, but that person may continue to come, even if it's not the big event. They may follow several of the groups there, and they begin to understand what live choral music is about. And then building a base of interest and support. And I'll talk a little bit about fundraising, but one of the things that happens often is um, a larger, more visible event can sometimes attract a new set of donors that are interested in those things. So a lot of things I'll talk about. Early in my life, I did collaborative endeavors out of necessity. As I said earlier, if I hadn't have done them, I wouldn't have had good outcomes, because I didn't have the resources I needed. But now that I'm older and been teaching for, about 35 years, I probably choose collaboration, because now it's not as much about the finances, although it still is. It's about the benefits that I know that exist from being collaborative. So, Greg, move us on down to the next panel. And Greg, you can interrupt me with questions, or any of you that are here anytime.
Well, Sonia Williams says, good afternoon from North Carolina. That's what we've got in chat so far.
Wow.
So, yeah, so good afternoon from North Carolina. That's pretty far away.
That's great. That's great. All right, let's go on down to the next panel. Can you scroll me down there? There you go. Okay. This is really the easy and most obvious list. You can often find people to pair up with for shared purpose. And for most of us, the first and most direct one is the musical purposes we have, whether that be about district choirs, all state choirs, festivals where you go just to share musical moments, and to make music, and to open the eyes of your kids, your students, or your church choir members, just about what's possible. I often like to believe that when students say, come to my festival at Southern Miss, that mountaintop experience, they go home and in many ways, not only do they demand that music continue of themselves, but of the people sitting in the chair next to them, but also of their teachers, that a continued work ethic and pursuit of excellence becomes about who they are. So shared purpose, joint major works. Major works are designed in oratorio, especially in the 18th and 19th century, to sing with full orchestra. Unless you have a remarkable sound system, you are needing hundreds of singers. And so joint major works become, in some ways, the only way to get that done anymore. There are sacred purposes. I grew up in Southern Baptist churches in Missouri, and my father was a church musician. I used to put groups together all the time to create that critical mass. But it was easy to put groups together that have a shared sacred journey. We had associational meetings. We did all kinds of different things. In Iowa, I worked for the Catholics, and I was able to bring together all kinds of events through the diocese. I even had a Catholic choral festival where I brought in 8 Catholic high schools. Now, mind you, some might say, well, I'm not in sacred music. This is just a template for showing you that you probably can find with people around you something in common, shared purpose, because purpose really is what most choral singing is about. I've done lots of ecumenical endeavors here in Hattiesburg. I brought in Mac Wheelberg, and we had 21 church choirs come for an event in 12. I brought in Benji Harlan and Howard Helvey and Kaylee Scott and Carolyn Hamlin in 08. And I think we had about the same number, about 20 churches come to be a part. I made my university kids be a part of that as well. But you can find lots of purpose through sacred things. And sometimes it's easy to make the ecumenical thing. I'll give you for instance, we bring our churches together in Hattiesburg this time of year, actually, COVID has kept us from it, for an event called the Bread Basket. And we simply meet. We have a service together, but we bring our choirs together. And the sole purpose of that event is to raise money to collect food for meeting the food needs, the food needs in Hattiesburg. But we have lots of those kind of things happening. And then there's, of course, community events. And this can be anything. Recently, my choir was involved in a swearing-in ceremony of U.S. citizens. So purpose is a great place to start when you start envisioning collaborative events. Let's move on down to the next panel. And here's, I think of the hotel commercial, Captain Obvious. But here is the obvious start to this. And this is the one that probably everybody can understand immediately. Anytime you hire an orchestra, you have a big bill. I used to hire an orchestra in Sioux City, and the bill for the orchestra alone was 20 grand, and it can be even more than that. Some places you have to rent facility. Anytime you have a big event, if you want attendance, you have to have advertisement, printed materials, or now on the internet. I found it to be easier to raise funds for larger profile events. The event I used to do in Sioux City was called Christmas at Cathedral. And since I was tied to the diocese, I would get that facility. But I brought in one of the community groups, which is an adult community group. I brought in some of the high school singers. I brought in some of my church choir singers. I brought in my collegiate group. By the time it was said and done, we would have between 4 and 6 ensembles. And that big of an event, I could go to certain individuals in the community, and they were much quicker about getting their checkbook out. And that 20,000 I mentioned for orchestra, I could almost always raise that ahead of the event, so that ticket sales actually could serve a different purpose. One of my best stories, shared cost. I was involved with a professional band in town, and I conducted that group. There was also an amateur community band that was a non-paid ensemble. And then I was involved at the Cathedral Arts Guild. We did programming at Cathedral, and then I taught at the local college. And why do I tell you about all 4 of those organizations? They all shared something in common. None of them had timpani, and the only timpanis they could get were broken, difficult to get, and it was trouble because the music making was pretty sound. The performance level quality was high, but we were getting timpani from the middle school that wouldn't tune and were torn up. And none of us could afford timpani. And I had a meeting with those 4 organizations. And I proposed that each organization buy 1 timpani to create a set of 4. And we got that done. And we, in fact, got the city to give us a place to store those timpani. And all 4 of those organizations managed to have great timpani for every big event they did. And they all owned 1 timpani. And that deal was brokered about 1998. And I think that deal lasted for about a decade. I think that fell apart after some time after I left Sioux City. But it was a good example of sharing costs. Another thing at the bottom, commissioning fees. I don't know how many of you have been approached in the last few years by a composer trying to create a consortium of commissioners. And sometimes, 5 high schools could go in and call a major composer and get that person to write them a piece. And obviously, dividing, say, a couple grand into 5 parts is quite a bit cheaper than paying the full 2,000 yourself or whatever that composer would like to receive for a commission. So that's another way to do some of those things. Greg, I'll ask you if there are any comments or questions before I move on, but let's go to the next panel.
At this point, we have a number of people that I can see in the chat room, but no one has a question so far.
Okay, let's move on. And by the way, those of you that can hear me, I hate not being able to see you. Hate, hate, hate. Okay. Um, I just was talking about shared purpose and shared costs. And then I just want to put a thing up here about um, serving multiple purposes, needs. And I'm going to go later on and talk about symbiotic um, relationships between sometimes vendors and choirs and different things like that. But as you know, when you tour or when you do uh, ecumenical or collaborative events, there's educational benefits, there are artistic benefits, there are recruiting benefits if you are someone that has to recruit. Whether you are at a private school, a community choir, a church choir, or a college like me, many of you know recruiting is important, and you gain that through visibility. This is kind of a bullet point view for me, but I can tell you that I've done over 20 convention appearances in the last 20 years at state, regional, national conventions, where I apply to perform and my groups are selected. But what I would say to you is that, in fact, being a part of that convention is collaborative. By going and participating there in that convention, I'm being a part of a larger event. I'm collaborating to put on an event, but I am also getting an educational experience for my students. I am probably recruiting at some point. I'm certainly getting visibility out of that. So being a participant in things in collaborative events can serve multiple purposes. Um, we have done a concert series throughout um, Mississippi and Alabama and Louisiana. And I would tell you that when you're in a concert series, it's collaborative in that the concert series is getting an artist out of you and they're filling up their series. One art series that I do in Gulfport is called Arts Under the Dome. They have jazz groups, folk music groups, but they'll have my top chorale come and sing. And it's a paid gig for us. But again, I'm getting an opportunity for my students to feel like they're being visible and also understanding what it's like to be putting on a professional gig. Any given day in my classroom, outside of 3 or 4 people, everybody in that room is expecting to be a professional musician in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's the same thing as in national events and international events. And I'll talk a little bit about that later on. But it comes on down here to shared journey, literature, and education. And I'll just tell you about some of the things that I've done over the years. There's a list that I'll have Greg show you in a few minutes of exchange concerts. I have found that my students learn more and get more excited about choral music when they do an exchange concert than almost any other way. And exchange concerts can be several things. They can be just where two groups perform separately, but oftentimes what's happened is we'll have joint pieces as well, whether that's one or two, and they'll get to work with a guest conductor. I've done exchange concerts with Luther College and with the University of Tennessee and Butler University. There's this list. My group has performed with professional choirs in Europe and in Sweden and in Romania and different places where we've worked it out that my students actually were on stage with performers from other choirs. Last year in Korea, we did a joint performance with choirs from Costa Rica, from I'm trying to think, Slovakia, just all these different places. And my students made friends, but they also had educational experiences through those exchange concerts. Very important. One year I did a collaborative tour, and we literally did not go anywhere and sing unless the school that was hosting us had agreed to sing both individually and with us. And that was Eastern Kentucky, University of Tennessee, Butler University, Vandercook, Southwest Illinois, Northwest Arkansas, and then our community college just south of us. But it might have been my students' favorite tour of all time. They sang with a choir every night. And then there's just a lot of things that happen because of that. And I could go through that for hours, but I just want you to know you can be aggressive about calling someone. All you have to do is pick up the phone. And I would say that Major Works, I added it up before I did this lecture. And I've done 60 extended works, multi-movement works since I arrived here in 2000, here in Hattiesburg or around. And those of you who know, when you put together orchestras the way I do, you cannot generally just use the people you have. I have about 220 singers in my program. But if I was doing Belshazzar's Feast, which we did in 2013, I really needed 300. So I went and I brought singers in. But it's just common for me to invite singers to be a part. We have 2 community groups at the university, and we're always bringing them in as well to do collaborative things like that. Greg, move that screen on down if you would. And here we go with something that I hope will make you think about your own circumstance and your community. I'm going to tell you a few stories here because I want you to know how they affected me. The first group on there is probably my best example. But the Siouxland All-America Band was a community band in Sioux City, Iowa. And they were just adults in the community who used to play in band and wanted to get their horn out of the case and keep playing. And they weren't bad. But you might be well aware that somehow band doesn't translate to adult groups the way choir does. And if you go to a record shop, tell me where you find the wind ensemble recordings. We're not consumers of wind music as a general rule in the adult population. And so the Siouxland All-America Band, they needed an audience. And they had players that wanted to play. They just needed an audience. They needed somebody who wanted to come hear them. And I remember the story. One of their board members came to a board meeting and made the suggestion that they began to make every concert that they did a benefit concert for someone. And what sounded like this crazy idea turned into something that was miraculous, because every year they would do 3 concerts during kind of pretty much a school year calendar, even though it was a community group. And they began to do concerts for the Heart Association and for the Salvation Army and for breast cancer awareness and for all kinds of organizations that did all kinds of good things. And they would only charge you enough to pay for their music and to possibly, get their expenses covered. And every dollar you made at the door went to the charity or the fundraising event. Well, do you know what? They had a waiting list, and they would sell out every concert. And not only did a lot of people come to hear them, and that's what they needed was an audience. They were seen as the goodwill ambassadors for that city. They raised money for so many organizations, and all they really wanted was somebody to be interested in what they were doing. But they turned an idea into something that gave them remarkable purpose. About almost a decade ago, we did a band search here for director of bands at the university, and I was chair of the committee. And one of our finalists, who did not take the job, she is currently at the University of Georgia. Cindy Johnston Turner was at Cornell University before she went to Georgia. And I got to spend a lot of time with her as the committee chair. But she told me about what she had done at Cornell University. And she had started a drive to collect old and broken band instruments all over the area where Cornell University is. And she would collect them. Then she went to all the music stores in the region that had instrument repair offered. And she, with her charm, convinced those folks to fix those instruments as a donation. Then she took her concert band to Costa Rica. And those concerts would bring in hundreds and thousands of people to hear that band play, which was a fine band. But then they gave those instruments to children in those communities where they did not have the resources to buy those instruments. And she made it her business to help start bands in the schools in Costa Rica. And, I followed and I thought about all the people that contributed to this incredible collaborative thing, but then the benefit to her students to begin to understand how they can do something that's bigger than themselves and is philanthropic, and to do all that happening. Well, that inspired me, and all those things inspired me, and I began to start planning some ideas for my own group. And the biggest one that came out of it was Jamaica. I happen to have had students here at Southern Miss in Jamaica. I have two currently, or three actually, three students. Two of them in my choir from Jamaica currently at Southern Miss. And we had a connection, and we began to go to Jamaica. But the person that helped me set up the trips would help us do benefit concerts. And believe you me, I was thinking about Cindy Johnston Turner. We would do benefits for a girls' home. We would do benefits for a capital campaign at a church. We would do a benefit concert for raising scholarship money at the University of the West Indies. And to be honest with you, I had no goal of getting anything in return. My goal was to give my students a chance to make music and to do something greater than just the music. But after the first trip, all of a sudden we were eating free at an all-inclusive resort at the beach. They were giving us Jamaican hotel rates and not tourist hotel rates. We were offered motor coaches last year to go. We were having receptions. We just had reduced rates at attractions. And I do all my own travel arrangements. But all of a sudden, my students were going to Jamaica for a wig and a prayer because they were doing something that was valued by the people in Jamaica. But not only, again, were my students learning about being, service-oriented in their life, we had monster crowds. The press would follow us around, both the television stations, the print press, and everybody was excited to see us and grateful for what was going on in those events. And I will be doing another one of those tours. But I say that to get you thinking. Every one of you lives in a community where needs are not always met, that need to be met. And you can figure out possible ways that your students gain an audience, their artistry is transmitted to people that might not have heard them, but they learn about how they can utilize what they do to a greater good. And I encourage you to create those circumstances. And I'll answer questions about that. Go on down, Greg. That's a good idea. I will tell you that I have been involved in a lot of travel, and I've done some lectures like this about how to set up tours. It's something that is a love of mine, but it's allowed my students to travel more because the cost has been accessible. I've never taught, and I want to say this now, I've never taught in a place where students or parents were affluent. I've always had to figure out how to put things together with duct tape and make a program go. But my students have experienced wonderful things. So this is where I get to symbiotic relationships. I want to talk to you about some other ways that I've collaborated. When I took my choir to Romania in 2013, some of you might know where Bran Castle is. Well, that's the one that's considered tied to Dracula. There was Vlad was this guy's name. He lived there, and he said he was a vampire, and there's legends, and thousands of people go to Bran Castle. Well, I called him up, and I asked them, do they ever have entertainment? Well, the guy had never thought about it. The guy who owned the castle, I said, we'd sing for you. So they hooked me up to sing in their courtyard for touring groups one day for an afternoon. Well, the consequence was we got free admission. Nothing else. But you know what? It wasn't cheap to get in. So I bartered. The next set of places, San Marco in Venice, Pisa, Salzburg, Merida, Mexico, all those places, Salisbury Cathedral, Trondheim Cathedral. I would exchange my choir to sing for their mass, but then I'm singing in remarkable venues, historical venues, getting that opportunity. If you've done touring and you go with the company, oftentimes you don't know this, but they're paying major dollars to get you access to some of these cathedrals. I know that I've been asked to pay as much as anywhere from $2,000 to $5,000 at some cathedrals in Europe to be able to sing there. And I then go about figuring out a way that we can sing for something they already are doing. I know that Trondheim Cathedral, they were having a cathedral choir concert. I asked if we could be a part of that concert, and we ended up being their guest. They did not charge us to sing there. If we'd sung in the afternoon, we would have paid probably a couple $1,000s. Trondheim is the great Gothic in Norway, where they still coronate their queen and kings. And but we were able to get in for free. So I bartered our appearance at events to get access to venues. The next one, premieres. Oddly enough, all three of the things listed there are three major works with orchestra. One's about 40 minutes long, about 20 minutes long, and one's over an hour. But these were all pieces that had been composed that no one had ever performed. These premieres needed a choir. And I will tell you, there are a lot of composers out there who are dying to have their piece performed. And if you can find them, they're not going to charge you to do that piece. They're going to be grateful if you provide them a good recording. It might be that they haven't got it published yet, but it could be they just would like to hear the piece and have somebody do it. And all three of these, one is now published, Seven Lost Words by Richard Burchard, The Prodigal by Mac Wheelberg, and American Requiem by a composer by the name of, I got to think of his name, Ed Penorwood out of Indiana. All three of these premieres were works I did not pay for. They were major works of the orchestra that needed a performance. But I have the recordings with me, and it's something to think about. You might be talking about a smaller scale. You might be able to find a composer that has a premiere piece that needs a choir. And then I wanted to talk to you about this last thing. I conducted a wind ensemble at one time, and the bills were paid by the city of Sioux City. Those of you who are from the Midwest, and maybe nobody is, there's a thing called the Iowa Band Law. And the Iowa Band Law requires the municipalities in Iowa to put a certain percentage of gathered tax revenue towards the arts. And they call it the Iowa Band Law because most communities in Iowa create a band. Smaller communities, it's a volunteer band. I mean, this is the land of John Philip Sousa, Carl King, all the big, great writers of marches. But in Sioux City, because we had so much corporate wealth and we had over 100,000, we had enough money to hire 50 people in a band 8 times in the summer. But much like that other band I talked about earlier, we needed an audience. And so I got to thinking, and my board, I challenged them to come up with a way of improving our audience, because we could seat, I want to say, up to 15,000 people. We would draw about 2,000 a week. So we went to corporations around Sioux City to provide free product. We didn't ask them for money, but we said, if you'll provide free product, we'll make you the sponsor for that event. Well, product is cheap for them. They're providing something that they're making for pennies that they sell retail, but they're getting the public to see their product. So we called Inner Baked Foods, and they brought cookies one night to the park for the concert. We called Chesterman, and they brought Coca-Cola products one night to the park. We called Blue Bunny from 20 miles north of us. They brought free ice cream to the park. We called Jolly Time Popcorn, who was located there. They brought popcorn to the park. Well, I don't need to tell you how important free stuff is to people for a concert. And I would just say to you, we were thinking out of the box, and we collaborated with these corporate sponsors. We didn't ask them for a dime. They provided product, but what we gained was major audience. And was a great, great thing. And I don't know if that would help any of you think about some things you could do or not. Greg, I think we're getting ready to run out of time here.
Well, yeah, we have 5 more minutes, and
I'm actually to the place where they just some lists. That shows the number of groups. That's the groups that I've performed with on the same concert in the last 20 years. And then there's listed extended works. But none of that happens, folks, without me being collaboratively minded. I guess I made up a word there. But if I did not have collaboration on my mind all the time, those things wouldn't happen. That's my presentation.
well, your poll was mostly attended by high school teachers. Where do you do music? High school.
Okay.
And we have a number of people that pretty much just said they love the music of Benji Harlan. One was, I have a face for radio. That was from me, because I do have a face for radio. And I believe a member of our team said that they like not being on camera. So,
Okay, well, there you go.
well, look, I want to say how pleased I am with this, and thank you for everyone that has attended. Our sincere appreciation to Dr. Gregory Fuller, who will be with us in March to work with our women's chorale, and we look forward to a great time and a great learning experience. For those of you that not have seen Dr. Fuller work, his choir uses tuning forks, and so he could have elaborated on that, but we'll ask him about that in March. Everybody, please stay safe. Dr. Fuller, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
It's valuable. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving. I'm out.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.